Welcome, everyone. Today, we are diving into the stream physico-chemical environment. Imagine trying to pitch a tent and live in the middle of a raging hurricane. You would need specialized gear, strong anchors, and a way to breathe through the heavy, chaotic winds. A fast-flowing stream presents a very similar physical challenge to the aquatic organisms that call it home. Understanding this environment is the very first step to understanding how life survives and thrives in moving water. Let us begin our journey into the blueprint of flowing waters. Now that we have pictured our watery wind tunnel, let us look at what makes it so challenging. A stream ecosystem is not a quiet, still pond. It is a highly dynamic environment where the water is constantly moving, mixing, and changing. The physico-chemical environment is simply the scientific term for the physical and chemical living conditions of this habitat. It includes the physical push of the water, the temperature, the rocks on the bottom, and the invisible chemicals dissolved in the water. Because the water is always flowing, these conditions can change rapidly over very short distances and times, making it a physically demanding place to live. Building on that idea of a dynamic habitat, let us break down exactly what we mean by physical and chemical components. The physical side includes the water's velocity, the total discharge, the temperature, light penetration, and the benthic substrate, which is just the physical material on the stream bed, like rocks or sand. On the chemical side, we are looking at dissolved gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide, the pH level, and dissolved nutrients such as nitrates and phosphates. This constant mixing creates a habitat that is incredibly rich in oxygen, but requires every single organism to be perfectly adapted to survive the physical push of the current. So, why do we care so much about these specific components? It matters because these factors act as a strict biological filter. They determine exactly which species can survive in a given stretch of water. For example, if a factory releases warm water into a stream, the physical temperature rises. This physical change chemically lowers the amount of oxygen the water can hold, potentially suffocating the fish. Engineers and conservationists must understand these physico-chemical rules to assess water quality and design infrastructure that will not destroy local habitats. Ultimately, the health of our unique hill stream fishes and human communities relies on this delicate balance. Having established why this environment is so critical, we must first measure how much water is actually moving through it. This brings us to the most fundamental physical property of a stream, known as stream discharge. Discharge is the total volume of water flowing through a specific cross-section of the stream per unit of time. It is considered the ultimate master variable because it influences absolutely everything else in the ecosystem. It dictates how much sediment is scoured from the bottom, how diluted chemical pollutants become, and how much physical force the aquatic organisms must withstand. To quantify this master variable, we use a very elegant and straightforward mathematical relationship. The formula is Q equals A times V. Let us break down what each symbol means. The letter Q represents the stream discharge, which tells us the volume of water moving past a point, measured in cubic meters per second. The letter A stands for the cross-sectional area of the stream channel, measured in square meters. You can think of this as the size of the pipe the water is flowing through. Finally, the letter V represents the average velocity, or speed of the water flow, measured in meters per second. If the area decreases because the stream gets narrower, the velocity must increase to push the same amount of water through. Before we move on, let us see this with a concrete example. Suppose we are studying a calm section of a river with a cross-sectional area of 20 square meters and a velocity of 0.5 meters per second. First, we calculate the total discharge by multiplying 20 by 0.5, giving us 10 cubic meters per second. Further downstream, the river enters a narrow, rocky gorge where the area shrinks to just 5 square meters. Because water cannot be compressed, that same 10 cubic meters must push through the gorge every second. We rearrange our formula, dividing the discharge of 10 by the new area of 5. This gives us a new velocity of 2.0 meters per second. The water must flow 4 times faster to get through the smaller space. Now that we have used this formula to find the new velocity, let us understand the physical principle behind it. What we just applied is known in physics as the continuity of flow. The fundamental idea is that water is an incompressible fluid. Assuming no water is added or lost, the total volume entering a section must exactly equal the volume leaving it. Therefore, the initial discharge must equal the final discharge. By substituting our discharge formula, we see that the initial area times initial velocity equals the final area times final velocity. This simple algebraic rearrangement perfectly mirrors the physical reality of the water being squeezed into a tighter space, forcing it to speed up. So, we have proven how water speeds up in narrow spaces. This brings us to how this physical movement affects the chemical environment, specifically dissolved oxygen. Unlike terrestrial animals, fish must extract invisible dissolved oxygen gas directly from the water to breathe and survive. In still water, oxygen only slowly diffuses into the surface layer. However, in fast-flowing streams, the water tumbles over rocks, creating chaotic, swirling currents known as turbulent flow. This turbulence acts like a giant whisk, constantly folding atmospheric air into the water. This is exactly why fast mountain streams are incredibly rich in oxygen, providing a lifeline for the organisms living there. Knowing that turbulence is the key to oxygenating the water, we need a way to predict when it will occur. We can mathematically predict whether a stream's flow will be smooth or turbulent using principles from fluid dynamics. It all comes down to a battle between two physical forces. On one side, we have the physical momentum pushing the water forward, crashing it into rocks and creating chaos. On the other side, we have the sticky internal friction of the water itself, trying to hold it back and keep the flow smooth and layered. By comparing these two forces, we can determine exactly what kind of environment the fish will experience. To calculate this balance of forces, we use the Reynolds number formula. The formula is RE equals rho times V times L, all divided by mu. Let us define these terms. RE stands for the Reynolds number, which is a unitless value. The Greek letter rho represents the density of the water. The letter V is the velocity of the stream. The letter L represents a characteristic length, like the diameter of a rock sitting in the water. Finally, the Greek letter mu represents the dynamic viscosity, which is the water's internal resistance to flow, or its thickness. When velocity increases, the Reynolds number increases, leading to highly turbulent flow that aggressively mixes oxygen into the water. Let us evaluate the physical conditions of a mountain stream to see if it provides enough turbulence. We are given a water density of 1,000, a velocity of 1.5 meters per second, a rock diameter of 0.2 meters, and a viscosity of 0.001. We plug these values into our formula. The numerator, representing the inertial forces, multiplies to 300. We then divide this by the very small viscosity value in the denominator. This gives us a massive Reynolds number of 300,000. Since a value greater than 2,000 indicates turbulence, this stream is extremely chaotic. This guarantees the water is fully saturated with dissolved oxygen, ideal for hill stream fishes. Now that we have calculated the turbulence, let us look at a visual representation of this entire process. On the left side of this diagram, you see the wide channel where the water flows slowly and smoothly, represented by the straight, parallel arrows. As the water moves to the right, it is forced into the narrow gorge. Just as we calculated earlier, the velocity dramatically increases here. Notice how the arrows turn into chaotic, swirling eddies. This is the turbulent flow we just proved exists using the Reynolds number. Above the turbulence, you can see atmospheric oxygen being actively folded and mixed down into the water, creating the perfect life support system for aquatic organisms. We have covered a lot of ground today, so let us summarize the most important ideas. First, the stream physico-chemical environment is a deeply interconnected system that acts as a strict biological filter, determining which species can survive. Second, stream discharge is the master variable. It shapes the physical habitat and dictates how fast the water must move when the channel changes size. Finally, this physical movement directly controls the chemical environment. High velocities create the turbulence necessary to constantly mix life-saving atmospheric oxygen into the water. You now understand the fundamental rules that govern flowing freshwater ecosystems. Excellent work today.